Welcome as we uncover one of the darkest and most mysterious crimes in American history, the boy in the box. In the bitter chill of February 1957, Philadelphia was gripped by a silence it had never known before. The city, bustling and alive with its usual industrial hum, was suddenly pierced by a discovery so horrific, so unnatural, that it would forever leave its mark on American true crime history. This was not the discovery of a mobster's victim in a back alley, nor the aftermath of a domestic quarrel gone violently wrong. No, this was something far more chilling, something that would come to be known with a name as tragic as it was haunting, as the boy in the box. It began in a desolate stretch of Fox Chase, a wooded, sparsely traveled area on the northern outskirts of Philadelphia. On February 25, 1957, a young man wandering the area stumbled upon a large cardboard box discarded in the brush. At first he paid little attention to it. Boxes, trash, discarded items, such things were not uncommon along lonely country roads. But curiosity, or perhaps instinct, led him closer. As he peered inside, he recoiled. What he saw was not garbage nor a forgotten bundle of household junk. Inside lay the body of a child. The boy was naked, wrapped in a cheap plaid blanket, his small form curled as though someone had tried to tuck him away neatly inside that box. His hair had been crudely cut, almost shaved as if done in haste, and his thin body bore bruises, the unmistakable marks of abuse. His eyes were closed, his lips slightly parted, and he looked, in the eerie stillness of that box, more like a discarded doll than a human child. The discovery should have been the start of answers. Instead, it was the beginning of a labyrinth of questions that would only grow darker as the years turned into decades. The boy was estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, malnourished, underweight, neglected. His small hands and feet suggested he had suffered more than just the final violence that claimed his life. Someone somewhere had failed this child long before he was left in that field. News of the discovery spread quickly. The Philadelphia police were summoned, and soon the quiet Fox Chase area was swarming with detectives, photographers, and forensic experts. The cardboard box was identified as one that had originally contained a J.C. Penney bassinet. This detail seemed promising. Such a purchase could be traced, perhaps leading to the parents or guardians of the boy. But the optimism would not last. Investigators examined the boy's body with grim precision. His hair, unevenly cut, suggested it had been cut either post-mortem or immediately before death. Some clumps of hair were found inside the box itself, as though someone had tried to hide or dispose of them hastily. His body bore small scars, marks that spoke of prior injuries and medical treatments. One scar in particular appeared surgical, possibly from a hernia operation. Another mark suggested he may have received treatment for an infection. This was not a child invisible to the world. At some point, someone had taken him to a doctor, to a hospital. Someone had once cared enough to treat him medically, and yet no one came forward. In the days following the discovery, the Philadelphia Police Department launched an investigation on a scale rarely seen for an unidentified child. Thousands of flyers with the boy's face were printed and distributed throughout the city and beyond. His photograph, along with a haunting artist's sketch of how he might have looked in life, was plastered on utility bills, sent with court notices, and mailed across Pennsylvania. Funeral homes, schools, orphanages, and hospitals were scoured for records that might match the child. Police officers painstakingly checked missing persons cases, compared descriptions, and interviewed desperate families who feared the boy might be theirs. But one by one, every lead collapsed into disappointment. The boy did not match any known missing child. No grieving family came forward to claim him. No mother or father appeared in the police station, sobbing with guilt or anguish. The silence was deafening. It was as though the child had never existed at all. The investigation quickly became one of the most exhaustive in the city's history. Detectives followed every thread, however thin. The box itself became a crucial piece of evidence. Investigators traced it back to a J.C. Penney store, where it had been sold as packaging for bassinets. They managed to identify the exact store and even track down a list of all the bassinets sold in that style. Yet when they followed the trail to individual purchasers, they ran into walls. The majority of leads ended in nothing useful, and the box itself yielded no fingerprints that could be linked to a suspect. The blanket in which the boy was wrapped was another potential clue. Made of cheap cotton flannel with a faded plaid pattern, it had been manufactured in bulk and distributed widely across the United States. Detectives canvassed suppliers and distributors, trying desperately to trace its origins, but like the box, it had no unique trail. It was just another common household item in mid-century America. The boy's body told its own silent story, but it was a story without a clear ending. He was malnourished, weighing only about 30 pounds. His ribs were visible, his limbs thin. Forensic experts believed he had suffered chronic neglect, perhaps starvation, in the months leading up to his death. The bruises and marks suggested he had been beaten, and his sudden tragic end may have come at the hands of those who were supposed to protect him. But who were they? And why did no one come looking for him? The press soon caught wind of the case, and Philadelphia's newspapers splashed the haunting images of the boy across their front pages. Citizens across the city were horrified. A nameless, faceless child, murdered and abandoned, while somewhere out there the person or people responsible walked free. It was an affront to every parent, every family, every community that prided itself on protecting its young. Tips began to pour in. Some claimed to have seen suspicious cars in the area. Others believed they recognized the boy from neighborhoods or from distant relatives. There were whispers of foster homes, orphanages, and underground adoptions gone wrong. Every lead carried with it a glimmer of hope, and every lead, in turn, was crushed by the weight of reality. None of them panned out. As days turned into weeks, detectives began to fear the worst, that the boy would never be identified, that his story would remain locked inside that cardboard box, hidden in the earth of Foxchase. But they refused to let the case go cold. In a move both macabre and desperate, police decided to release post-mortem photographs of the child to the public. These were not simple sketches or softened recreations. They were raw, unsettling images of the boy himself, cleaned and dressed, positioned as though still alive, in hopes that someone, anyone, might recognize him. The photographs shocked the public, but they also kept the case alive in the national consciousness. For years afterward, detectives would revisit the boy's face, showing it to anyone who might provide a spark of recognition. And yet, recognition never came. The boy was buried in a potter's field, marked only as America's unknown child. The city mourned him, though no one knew his name. The case files grew thicker, the tips thinner. Detectives obsessed over the mystery, returning to it year after year, unable to let it go. They had seen many murders, many victims, but something about this boy clung to them like a shadow. Because, in truth, the boy in the box was not just a victim of one crime. He was the victim of silence, of invisibility, of a society that allowed a child to fall through every crack until he was left alone, discarded, and nameless. His story was more than a mystery. It was a tragedy that struck at the very heart of what it means to be human. As the years passed, theories multiplied. Some believed the boy had been the victim of an abusive foster home. Others suspected an unwed mother had killed him to hide her shame. There were whispers of child trafficking, of underground adoption rings, of families so broken they chose secrecy over justice. Every theory had its believers, and yet every theory collapsed under scrutiny. And so the boy in the box lingered in the collective memory, a case frozen in time. A nameless child waiting for someone to give him back his identity, his story, his justice. This was only the beginning. The boy in the box did not fade away into silence after his burial. If anything, his nameless presence seemed to haunt Philadelphia itself. For the detectives who had seen his small body inside that cardboard coffin, the case was more than just another unsolved file. It was an open wound. They could not let it go. Year after year, they returned to it, chasing fragments of hope, trying to pry answers out of the shadows. The investigation was relentless. Police canvassed the Fox Chase neighborhood, questioning anyone who lived near the wooded area where the boy was found. They searched for families with missing children, for foster homes or orphanages that might have quietly disposed of a child who had become too much of a burden. But everywhere they turned, they were met with dead ends. No local family reported a missing son. No orphanage claimed to have lost track of a child. And yet, a child does not simply appear from nowhere. Someone somewhere had known him. Detectives began to consider the possibility that the boy had come from outside Philadelphia. If his family lived far away, perhaps they had dumped him in Fox Chase precisely because it was secluded, a place where no one would connect the body to them. The thought only deepened the sense of hopelessness. The search radius could be anywhere. The boy's anonymity was his killer's shield. Still, investigators pressed on. They fingerprinted the boy, hoping perhaps his prints might be on file from a hospital visit, a school record, or some prior encounter with the system. But no match appeared. His teeth were examined, yet dental records offered nothing. In the 1950s, forensic science was still in its infancy, and DNA testing was not yet a dream. The police had photographs, fingerprints, footprints, and even the boy's body itself, but none of it could tell them his name. Frustrated but determined, detectives turned to the public in ways few cases ever had. The post-mortem photographs, posed to make him appear alive, were circulated across newspapers, posters, and flyers. Philadelphia residents recoiled at the grim images, yet thousands studied the boy's face, searching their memory, wondering if they had seen him in a park, on a street corner, in a hospital waiting room. Still, no one could place him. It was as if he had been erased from the world before he was even found. Despite the lack of progress, the case attracted a devoted following within the Philadelphia Police Department. Certain detectives could not rest. They returned to the case in their free time, poring over the evidence again and again, refusing to let the child vanish into obscurity. One such detective was Remington Bristow, a medical examiner's investigator who became almost obsessed with uncovering the boy's identity. Bristow believed the answer lay not in some faceless stranger, but in the community itself, someone close, someone who knew how to hide in plain sight. In the early 1960s, Bristow developed a theory that the boy had come from a foster home located not far from where the body was found. The home was known to take in many children, some of them under questionable conditions. Bristow believed the boy had been one of them and that the foster family had killed him either accidentally or intentionally, then disposed of his body in the woods. He pursued this theory doggedly, going so far as to track down the family members, investigate their home, and even attend their estate sale years later. At that sale, Bristow noticed something chilling. The Foster home had owned a bassinet similar to the one once sold in the J.C. Penney box. They also had blankets strikingly like the one the boy had been wrapped in. To Bristow, this was no coincidence, it was proof. But police, bound by procedure and evidence, could not act on suspicion alone. They investigated the Foster family, questioned them, and examined the property. But no definitive link could be established. The case remained stuck in limbo, Bristow's suspicions hovering like a dark cloud, but never solidifying to hard fact. Bristow refused to let go. For decades, he clung to the Foster home theory, even as his health declined. He believed until his dying day that the family had been involved. Others, however, dismissed it as obsession. Without tangible evidence, it remained one of many theories disturbing, but unproven. Meanwhile, the case continued to generate tips, each one stranger than the last. In 1960, a man confessed to killing the boy. Investigators rushed to interrogate him, but it quickly became clear he was unstable, and his story fabricated. Another woman claimed she had seen a child resembling the boy being sold in an illegal adoption ring. Yet no records, no witnesses, no concrete evidence ever substantiated these claims. As the 1970s and 1980s rolled on, the boy-in-the-box case seemed destined to fade into the abyss of unsolved mysteries. Yet its haunting nature kept it alive in the public imagination. True crime magazines revisited it, amateur sleuths discussed it, and every new detective assigned to the Philadelphia Homicide Division inevitably found themselves staring into those same post-mortem photographs, wondering who the boy had been. In 1998, a startling new development emerged, one that breathed fresh life into the case and set off a firestorm of speculation. A woman, known in the case records only as M, came forward with a shocking story. According to her, she had grown up in an abusive household, and her mother had purchased the boy, whose name she believed was Jonathan, from his biological parents. M claimed her mother had subjected the boy to years of abuse, treating him as little more than a prisoner. She described in detail how her mother had beaten him, locked him in a cold basement, and denied him food. Eventually, she said, her mother had killed him in a fit of rage. Panicked, the family had cut his hair to disguise him, wrapped him in a blanket, and dumped him in the woods in the cardboard box. The details M provided were disturbingly accurate. She knew about the blanket, the haircut, the malnourishment, all things that had not been publicized widely. For investigators desperate for answers, her story seemed like the missing puzzle piece. But as they dug deeper, doubts began to form. M had a history of mental illness, and her accounts were inconsistent over time. She could not provide concrete proof, and investigators could not connect her family to the box or the blanket in any verifiable way. Still, some detectives believed her story, even if they couldn't prove it. For them, it was the most plausible explanation they had ever heard. And yet, without hard evidence, the boy remained unidentified, his killer unnamed. His grave, marked America's Unknown Child, remained one of the most visited in Philadelphia. People brought flowers, toys, and notes, mourning for a child who had no family to mourn him. He became a symbol of all the forgotten children, those who slipped through society's cracks and paid the ultimate price. As the millennium turned, technology began to catch up with the mystery. Advances in DNA testing sparked new hope. In 1998, the boy's body was exhumed for the first time. Forensic experts carefully collected DNA samples, preserving them for future testing. Though the science was still young, it was a lifeline finally. a chance that someday his identity might be uncovered through genetic evidence. The exhumation also brought renewed media attention. Documentaries, news specials, and books revisited the case, introducing a new generation to the haunting mystery of the boy in the box. The more the case was exposed, the more it dug its claws into the public psyche. This was not just a local Philadelphia story anymore. It was becoming a national ghost, a story that clung to every parent's deepest fear. A child, nameless and discarded, abandoned by the very people meant to protect him. Detectives pressed forward with modern tools, but the years had eroded much of the evidence. Witnesses were gone, records destroyed, suspects dead. All that remained was the boy himself, silent but waiting. His DNA profile was uploaded to national databases. Comparisons were made with missing children across the country. Leads emerged, then evaporated. Each failure deepened the tragedy. And yet the case endured. No matter how much time passed, detectives refused to close it. Every generation of police felt an unspoken duty to this child, to give him a name, to restore the humanity that had been stolen from him. But if the first 40 years of the investigation had taught them anything, it was this. The boy in the box was not just a mystery. He was a mirror, reflecting the failures of a society that had let him vanish into the shadows, a society that still struggled to understand how a child could live, suffer, and die without anyone stepping forward to say, "He was mine." And so the questions remained. Who was he? Who had he belonged to? And why had no one ever come looking? The answers, it seemed, were still buried, hidden in the silence that had surrounded him from the beginning. By the early 2000s, the boy in the box case had become more than a mystery. It was an obsession woven into the very fabric of Philadelphia's history. Generations had grown up with the story. School children had whispered about him, amateur sleuths had pored over his photographs, and police officers had inherited the case files as though they were sacred texts passed down from one watch to the next. Yet despite all the attention, the boy's name remained lost. He was still America's unknown child, a title that sounded noble, but carried within it the unbearable weight of anonymity. Hope, however, was not dead. Advances in forensic science were reshaping cold cases across the country. Where traditional detective work had failed, technology was beginning to succeed. DNA analysis, once primitive and inconclusive, had grown increasingly powerful. What had once been little more than a scientific experiment in the 1990s was, by the 2000s, a precise tool capable of unlocking the secrets of blood, hair, and bone. And for the boy in the box, the science of DNA would prove to be both a weapon and a key. The 1998 exhumation had preserved his genetic material, and in 2000, that DNA was uploaded into the FBI's CODIS database, which housed the profiles of criminals, arrestees, and missing persons. Investigators held their breath as the system ran its comparisons. But once again, the result was heartbreakingly familiar. No match. The boy's DNA belonged to no one on file. Still, the effort did not stop. Forensic teams refined their testing, building more complete profiles. The boy's mitochondrial DNA, inherited through the maternal line, was identified and stored, allowing investigators to search for relatives in the years ahead. It was a foundation, a promise that when the world caught up, the boy would no longer be voiceless. In the meantime, the case became a magnet for volunteers. One group, the Vidocq Society, a Philadelphia-based organization of retired detectives, FBI agents, and forensic experts, took the case under its wing. The society, named after the legendary French detective Eugène François Vidocq, prided itself on tackling cold cases. To its members, the boy in the box represented the ultimate riddle. They examined every scrap of evidence, every theory, every possible suspect. They debated the foster home connection, revisited Emma's confession, and pored over the box and blanket once again. For years, they hosted meetings devoted to the boy, refusing to let the case fade away. Yet for all their expertise, they too were trapped in the same cycle as the police, promising leads that turned into nothing, clues that dissolved under scrutiny. The boy remained locked in his coffin of mystery. But technology was moving forward. By the 2010s, a revolution was underway in the world of forensic genealogy. Companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe had unleashed a wave of consumer DNA testing. Millions of people were spitting into tubes, sending them to laboratories and receiving detailed maps of their ancestry. For law enforcement, this was a gold mine. Suddenly, an unidentified body didn't need a direct family match. It could be identified by cousins, distant relatives, entire family trees pieced together from genetic data. It was the method that had caught the infamous Golden State Killer in 2018. And it was the method that investigators hoped could finally give the boy in the box his name. Philadelphia police partnered with experts in forensic genealogy to re-examine the boy's DNA. It was a painstaking process, requiring careful extraction from decades-old remains, followed by sequencing and uploading into genealogical databases. For years, the data sat there, building connections, mapping out distant relatives. Slowly, piece by piece, a family tree began to emerge. The boy was no longer just a ghost. He was connected to real people, living relatives who had no idea their DNA was about to unlock one of America's greatest mysteries. While the genealogical work unfolded, detectives revisited the case's haunting legacy. Forensic artists created age regression images showing what the boy might have looked like as a toddler, a newborn, or even a school-aged child. The public continued to speculate. Some remained convinced the foster home theory was correct. Others clung to M's confession, seeing in it the only explanation for the boy's abuse and malnourishment. Online forums buzzed with theories, turning the case into a macabre legend of the digital age. Through it all, the boy's grave became a place of pilgrimage. People visited America's unknown child, not only to mourn him, but to make a silent promise. You will not be forgotten. Small toys, flowers, and handwritten notes accumulated year after year, proof that, even in anonymity, he had become loved. In 2019, the boy's body was exhumed once more. Technology had advanced even further, and investigators were determined to gather the most accurate DNA profile possible. This time, they succeeded in creating a powerful genetic map. Once again, genealogists began building connections, tracing lineages, studying family trees that stretched across states and generations. The process was slow, requiring patience and precision. But unlike decades past, there was real hope now. Behind the scenes, detectives worked tirelessly with the genealogists, examining every possible connection. Relatives began to appear distant cousins who had no idea they were tied to a decades-old mystery. The tree narrowed, branches focused, and slowly, the outline of an identity began to take shape. Meanwhile, the cultural fascination with the boy in the box only deepened. Documentaries revisited the story, podcasts dissected the theories, and true crime communities debated endlessly about the suspects. For many, the case had taken on a symbolic weight. It was no longer just about one child, it was about all the children who had been silenced, abused, and forgotten. The boy stood as a representative of innocence betrayed, of justice delayed, but never surrendered. And then, after 65 years of silence, the case finally cracked. In late 2022, Philadelphia police announced that they had identified the boy in the box through forensic genealogy. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born in January of 1953. He was 4 years old when he died. For the first time in more than half a century, the nameless child had been given back his name. The revelation sent shockwaves through the true crime world. For decades, Joseph had been a ghost, a face without a story. Now, suddenly, he was real. He had parents, siblings, a family history. He was no longer unknown. He was Joseph. But with the answer came new questions, questions that only deepened the darkness. Investigators revealed that Joseph had lived in Philadelphia. He had been born into a troubled family. His father, Augustus, and his mother, Mary, had both struggled with instability. Relatives recalled a household marked by dysfunction and neglect. The picture that emerged was not one of a child stolen or hidden by strangers, but of a boy who had been failed by the very people meant to protect him. Even more haunting was the silence that followed. Joseph had family-living relatives who were connected to him by blood. Yet no one had ever come forward in 1957 to report him missing. No one had claimed him. No one had demanded justice. For 65 years, his small body lay nameless in the earth while those connected to him by blood remained silent. Why? Was it fear, shame, or complicity? The truth remains locked in a silence as heavy as the grave. The police, in announcing Joseph's identification, made one thing clear. The case was far from over. They had given him back his name, but they had not yet given him justice. His killer or killers remained unknown. Some were surely dead by now, buried in their own graves, but others may still be alive, carrying the terrible secret of what happened in 1957. Detectives vowed to keep investigating, to uncover not just who Joseph was, but who had killed him and why. For the city of Philadelphia, the announcement was both a victory and a heartbreak. A victory because Joseph was no longer forgotten. A heartbreak because his story was even more tragic than imagined. He had not been stolen by strangers. He had not vanished from some distant city. He had lived right there in Philadelphia, invisible and unwanted, until his short life was extinguished. The grave marker that had long read America's Unknown Child now bore his true name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Visitors came in greater numbers than ever before, standing before the stone, whispering his name, ensuring it would never again be lost to history. But the story of Joseph is not just about an identification. It is about the failure of an entire community. How could a child vanish without anyone demanding answers? How could parents, relatives, neighbors all remain silent while a boy wasted away from neglect and died in violence? These questions cut deeper than the mystery itself because they force us to confront a truth society often hides from, that the worst monsters are sometimes those closest to home. Even in 2022, with Joseph's name restored, detectives warned the public this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the focus would shift from who was the boy to who killed Joseph Zarelli. And though 6 decades had passed, the hunt was far from over. The years dragged on, and the mystery of the boy in the box clung to Philadelphia like an unshakable shadow. By the late 1960s, most of the original investigators had either retired or transferred. Yet the case remained alive in their minds, as if the child's silent eyes had burned themselves into memory. Every so often, a new tip emerged, but none ever seemed to penetrate the wall of secrecy surrounding this case. The boy's identity remained buried in silence, as if his life had been erased long before the public ever knew him. What lingered was a deep and growing sense that this crime was not simply unsolved, but untouchable. In the 1970s and 1980s, interest would flare and fade like a flickering flame. The case was sometimes mentioned in retrospectives on unsolved murders, always framed as a haunting mystery that refused to yield. The public had largely forgotten, but for detectives who had seen that cardboard box firsthand, it was a nightmare that would not end. They remembered the bitter cold of that February day, the silence of the crime scene, the cruel indignity of a nameless child discarded like trash. Those images would stay with them forever. In 1998, 4 decades after the discovery, the boy was finally given a small dignity. His remains, which had been buried in a potter's field, were exhumed so that DNA samples could be taken. Advances in forensic technology gave hope that perhaps, at last, his identity might be unlocked. The boy's tiny body, long forgotten by most, was handled with care as forensic experts searched for genetic clues. Though progress was slow, this moment symbolized something larger, a refusal to let him vanish completely. His body was later reburied at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedarbrook, with a new headstone reading simply, "America's Unknown Child." Visitors began to leave flowers and toys at the grave, small tokens of remembrance for a child who had been denied love and recognition in life. Yet even as science advanced, the case remained elusive. DNA testing produced profiles, but without a name or family to match them to, it was like staring at a locked door without a key. Theories and whispers resurfaced, each one darker than the last. Some speculated that the boy had been a foster child, abused and hidden away until death finally freed him. Others suspected he might have been sold or traded, a victim of an underground network where children were treated as commodities. These ideas were horrifying, but in the absence of truth, the imagination filled the void. One of the most disturbing accounts came in 2002, when a woman known only as Martha came forward with a story. She claimed that her mother had purchased the boy, kept him hidden in a basement, and subjected him to years of abuse before finally killing him in a fit of rage. According to Martha, the boy had lived in a life of misery, denied love, food, and dignity, until his body was discarded in the woods. Investigators initially took her claim seriously. Her story had eerie consistencies with some aspects of the case. But as they probed deeper, doubts surfaced. Martha had a history of mental health struggles, and parts of her account could not be verified. Ultimately, the story unraveled under scrutiny, dismissed as unreliable. Still, the horror of what she described stuck in the public's mind, leaving a stain of possibility that was difficult to forget. In the decades that followed, the boy in the box became something more than a case file. He became a symbol of all the lost children, all the unnamed victims who were cast aside by society. Amateur sleuths obsessed over his story, dedicating forums, websites, and entire communities to the search for his name. They studied the photographs, the autopsy reports, and every detail of the box, hoping to notice what generations of detectives had missed. Some even traveled to Philadelphia, tracing the path through the woods where the box had been found, as if standing on that cold ground might reveal the truth. But the silence of the case remained unbroken, as if the boy himself was determined to keep his secrets. The case also evolved into a chilling cautionary tale of how easily a life could vanish. In the 1950s, the systems meant to protect children were weak and underfunded. Thousands of children slipped through the cracks, unregistered, unmonitored, and unprotected. In such a world, it was terrifyingly possible for a child to exist without a trace and to die without justice. The boy in the box was not only a victim of violence, but of neglect by whoever raised him, and by a society that had failed to see him until it was too late. By the 2010s, The case had achieved near-legendary status in Philadelphia, whispered about in true crime circles, and remembered every year by those who refused to let the boy disappear. His grave became a place of pilgrimage where strangers came to leave tokens of affection, teddy bears, notes, flowers, gestures of love given decades too late. He was no longer just a victim. He was a reminder of what happens when a child's voice is silenced, when suffering hides in the shadows, and when cruelty is allowed to go unseen. Even as years piled on, the darkness of the case did not fade. In fact, the longer the boy remained unnamed, the more unsettling it became. To die is tragic, but to die without identity, to be stripped of even a name, is a cruelty that gnaws at the conscience of everyone who hears the story. It made people wonder how many more forgotten children were out there, buried in shallow graves, hidden in basements, or lost in the bureaucratic cracks of the system. The boy in the box was a face for all of them, a constant reminder of what was possible when cruelty and silence intertwined. Investigators held on to the hope that technology might one day provide the answer. The development of forensic genealogy, the same method that helped capture the Golden State Killer, seemed to offer a new path. DNA could be used not just to confirm identity, but to trace bloodlines, building family trees until a name finally emerged. For those who had worked the case for decades, this represented the last, best chance to free the boy from anonymity. But the work was painstaking, and the past was heavy with secrets. And so, the boy in the box remains one of America's most haunting mysteries. He was not found on a battlefield, yet he was given the title of America's unknown child. He was not a soldier, yet he bore the marks of a war one fought in silence, behind closed doors with fists and neglect as weapons. His face, preserved in black and white photographs, stares out like a ghost, asking a question that still has no answer. Who was he? The chilling truth is that the boy's story may never be complete. Time has swallowed the witnesses, erased the trails, and blurred the memory of those who might have once known. What remains is the story of a nameless child, a box in the woods, and a city haunted by what it found. In that silence lies the darkest truth of all, that sometimes the most horrifying crimes are not the ones we know, but the ones that remain forever unanswered. And until the day his name is spoken, the boy in the box will remain suspended in history, a symbol of innocence betrayed and justice denied, his small body echoing the pain of all the lost voices who never had the chance to be heard. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share